I'm Ava, 32 female. I live in a quiet apartment in the city with my cat, Apollo, and I work as a senior financial analyst. My life is orderly and predictable, a stark contrast to the chaotic energy of my extended family. This is the story of how my family decided I was too much trouble for a wedding, only to discover that the real trouble was their own making. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. My family operates on a very specific, unspoken set of rules. On the surface, we are all about unity, support, and showing up for each other. But beneath that veneer, there's a clear hierarchy. At the top sits my Aunt Carol, the self-appointed matriarch, and right beside her, her golden child daughter, my cousin Jessica. Everyone else orbits them, careful not to disrupt their gravitational pull. I, on the other hand, have always been more of a distant moon, content to keep to my own trajectory. This independence, this refusal to get swept up in the daily dramas, has always been interpreted as coldness. My quiet nature was seen as judgmental, and my preference for logic over hysterics was labeled as a lack of passion. I'm a financial analyst. My entire career is built on risk assessment, pattern recognition, and advising clients on how to make sound, rational decisions to secure their future. I apply the same principles to my own life. I save diligently, I invest wisely, and I don't make emotional purchases. To Aunt Carol and Jess, this makes me boring. To them, life is meant to be a grand, theatrical performance, and my calm, spreadsheet-driven existence is a flat note in their symphony. They thrive on impulse, on grand gestures, and on the validation that comes from social media likes and envious whispers. Jess, a social media manager, has built her entire identity around a carefully curated online persona of effortless glamour and boundless popularity. So, when Jess announced her engagement to Mark, a perfectly nice but hopelessly malleable real estate agent, I knew it wouldn't just be a wedding. It would be a production. It would be the wedding of the century, as Jess had captioned the Instagram post featuring her oversized diamond ring. The family group chat exploded with congratulations and heart emojis. I sent my genuine well wishes, of course, and even called Jess to congratulate her personally. The call was brief. She was too busy screenshotting comments to engage in a real conversation, but she assured me I'd be getting a save the date soon. The save the dates went out a month later. It was a ridiculously elaborate affair involving a small box, laser-cut acrylic, and a custom website. My cousin Leo, who works as a graphic designer, called me the day he got his. "Can you believe this thing?" he laughed. "I think it cost more than my first car. The website has a countdown timer and a professionally shot video of them walking on a beach at sunset. It's a lot." "It's very Jess," I replied, smiling. "Did you see the registry? They're asking for contributions to a honeymoon fund to Bali, but they also registered for a $2,000 espresso machine." "Of course they did," Leo said. "Well, I'll see you there. We'll have to stick together to survive the spectacle." But my save the date never arrived. At first, I chalked it up to a male issue. I waited a week, then two. When other relatives started talking about booking their hotels, a quiet, cold knot began to form in my stomach. I knew what was happening, but I didn't want to believe it. This felt like a new level of petty, even for them. The pretext they would eventually use stemmed from an incident 3 years prior at our family's Christmas gathering. One of our uncles had been drinking heavily all evening. When it was time to leave, he was stumbling towards his car keys. I quietly intercepted him, took his keys, and told him I'd call him a cab. It was a simple, responsible act, but he made a scene, shouting that I was embarrassing him. Aunt Carol rushed over, not to support me, but to placate him. She took his side, telling me I was causing a scene and making things awkward. The next day, the family narrative had been cemented. Ava had ruined Christmas by trying to control everyone and stirring up trouble. It didn't matter that I was right. I had disrupted the carefully maintained illusion of a perfect, happy family. This incident became my brand. Anytime there was a disagreement, Aunt Carol would sigh and say, let's not have a repeat of the Christmas drama. If I offered a differing opinion on anything, from politics to a new recipe, Jess would roll her eyes and mutter, "Here we go again." I was the designated troublemaker, the family truth-teller, which in their world was the most offensive role one could play. The truth interfered with the narrative. The wedding planning escalated, and I watched from a distance through the lens of social media and Leo's occasional updates. Jess had chosen a venue that was famous on Instagram, a restored barn that charged a fortune for its rustic chic aesthetic. Her dress was a custom designer piece. She was flying in a specific type of flower from Holland because its particular shade of blush pink was essential to her vision. Every detail was documented online, accompanied by hashtags like JessAnnMarkForever and Wedding Goals. Behind the scenes, Leo told me things were chaotic. Jess was changing her mind every other day, throwing tantrums when vendors couldn't meet her increasingly outlandish demands. Aunt Carol was acting as the wedding general, calling suppliers and trying to intimidate them into giving her daughter discounts. Mark, the groom, seemed to be little more than a silent partner, occasionally appearing in photos with a strained smile, his only role to agree with whatever Jess wanted. The official invitations went out 2 months later. They were even more ostentatious than the save the dates, printed on thick cardstock with gold foil lettering. Leo called me the day his arrived. There was an awkward silence on the line before he asked, "So, did you get yours?" "No, Leo, I didn't," I said, my voice flatter than I intended. "Ava, that's not right," he said, his voice laced with anger. "I'm going to call my mom and find out what's going on. I'll call Carol myself." "Don't," I said immediately. "Please don't. It's their wedding. They can invite who they want. If they don't want me there, fighting about it will only prove their point that I'm a troublemaker." "But you're not a troublemaker. You're the most level-headed person in this entire family," he protested. "And that's the problem, isn't it?" I replied, a sad smile touching my lips. In a family that runs on drama, the person who refuses to participate is the biggest threat of all. I tried to let it go. I told myself it was fine. It would save me the cost of a gift, a dress, and a hotel room. It would save me a weekend of forced smiles and navigating Aunt Carol's passive-aggressive comments. It was, in a way, a blessing. But it still stung. It was a deliberate, public declaration that I was not wanted, that I was the black sheep, the unwanted guest, the piece of the family puzzle that they had decided to throw away because it didn't fit their perfect picture. The silence from their end was deafening. No call, no text, no explanation. Just an empty mailbox and the quiet, painful confirmation of my exclusion. A week passed after the invitations were sent out. The silence from Aunt Carol and Jessica was a statement in itself. They weren't going to offer an explanation unless I forced one, and I knew that was their strategy. They wanted me to call, to ask, to create the confrontation they could then use as evidence against me. "See," I could hear Aunt Carol saying to the rest of the family, "I told you she would make this a whole big thing." I refused to give them the satisfaction. My dignity was worth more than a seat at their performative wedding. So I waited. I went to work, analyzed market trends, advised clients on their portfolios, and came home to my quiet, orderly apartment. I tried to push the hurt down, converting it into a cool, logical acceptance of the facts. Fact, I was not invited. Fact, the reason was based on a manufactured narrative about my personality. Fact, reacting emotionally would only validate their narrative. The best course of action was to do nothing. But on a Tuesday evening, as I was making dinner, my phone rang. The caller ID displayed Aunt Carol. My heart gave a little jolt, a mixture of dread and a foolish flicker of hope. Maybe there had been a mistake. Maybe she was calling to apologize. I took a deep breath, steeled myself, and answered. "Hello, Aunt Carol," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "Ava, honey, how are you?" she began, her voice dripping with a saccharine sweetness that always set my teeth on edge. It was her preamble voice, the one she used before delivering bad news or asking for a favor. "I'm fine, thanks, just making some dinner. How are you?" "Oh, just so busy, you know how it is. This wedding is a full-time job," she laughed, a sound that was entirely without humor. Jess is just beside herself with excitement. Everything has to be perfect, you know, my Jessie. I'm sure it will be lovely, I said, playing along with the charade. There was a pause, and I knew she was waiting for me to bring it up. I refused. I stayed silent, letting the awkwardness hang in the air. Finally, she sighed dramatically. Well, I suppose you're wondering why I'm calling. The thought had crossed my mind. I replied dryly. Look, Ava, she said, her tone shifting from sweet to businesslike. I wanted to talk to you about the wedding invitations. I know you probably noticed you didn't receive one. Yes, I noticed. We just think it's for the best, she said, the words coming in a rehearsed rush. Jess is under so much pressure right now. She's so stressed, and her happiness is my #1 priority. We just can't risk any drama on her big day. You know how you can be, honey. You have a tendency to stir things up. I felt a flash of hot anger but immediately suppressed it. Stir things up, I repeated, my voice dangerously calm. Could you give me an example of what you mean by that? Oh, you know, she said vaguely. Like that Christmas incident. You made your uncle feel so terrible, and it cast a pall over the whole evening. We just can't have anything like that happening at the wedding. It's a day for celebration, not for confrontation. The sheer audacity of her revisionist history was breathtaking. I hadn't confronted anyone. I had prevented a drunk driving incident. I had been responsible. But in her world, responsibility was confrontational. Aunt Carol, I said, my voice still level. I stopped a man who was visibly intoxicated from getting behind the wheel of a car. In what world is that, stirring up trouble? You made a public spectacle of it, she insisted, her voice rising. There were other ways to handle it. You embarrassed him, and you embarrassed the family. Jessica just can't handle that kind of negative energy right now. It's her day, and she deserves for it to be perfect and positive. There it was, the core of their philosophy. The appearance of perfection was more important than actual safety, integrity, or kindness. An uncomfortable truth was negative energy, while a dangerous lie was acceptable as long as everyone was smiling. Arguing with her was like arguing with a brick wall. It was pointless. So I shifted my strategy. I would not give her the fight she was expecting. I would give her cold, hard acceptance. I understand, I said simply. The line went quiet. I could practically hear the gears turning in her head, confused by my lack of protest. This wasn't going according to her script. You do, she stammered. Yes, it's Jessica's wedding, and you both have the right to decide who you celebrate with. If my presence is a source of stress, then it's logical that I shouldn't be there. Thank you for calling to let me know your reasoning. It's very clear now. Her confusion quickly turned to frustration. Well, I'm glad you're being so mature about it, she said, though her tone implied I was being anything but. She had wanted tears, anger, pleading. She had wanted a dramatic scene to recount to Jessica. I had robbed her of her ammunition. There's no reason not to be, I replied. I hope she and Mark have a beautiful day. Please send them my best wishes. I will, she said curtly. The conversation now concluded far more quickly than she had planned. Well, I have to go. So many calls to make. Goodbye, Aunt Carol, I said, and I hung up before she could. I stood in my kitchen for a long moment, the phone still in my hand. The hurt was there, a deep, aching bruise in my chest. But alongside it was something else, a strange sense of liberation. The final thread connecting me to their circus had been snipped. I was officially out. I didn't have to pretend anymore. I didn't have to walk on eggshells or brace myself for passive-aggressive remarks at the next family gathering. I was free. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed with a text from Leo. My mom just told me what Carol did. I'm so sorry, Ava. It's completely unacceptable. I'm thinking of not going. I called him immediately. Don't you dare boycott the wedding on my account, I told him, my voice firm. You need to go and support Jess and Mark. Please don't make this into a bigger issue. That's exactly what they want. But it's wrong, he argued. They're treating you horribly. I know, and I appreciate you having my back more than you know. But honestly, Leo, I think I'm relieved. A whole weekend of that family, with the stress levels dialed up to 100. It sounds exhausting. Now I have a free weekend and a few $100s I don't have to spend on a gift. Leo was quiet for a moment. Are you sure you're okay? I will be, I said, and for the first time I truly believed it. I'm going to be perfectly fine. That night I opened my laptop. I had been saving for a new investment, a safe but unexciting index fund. I looked at the balance, the money I had set aside from bonuses and careful budgeting. The money that would have gone towards a flight, a hotel, a dress, and a gift for a wedding I wasn't welcome at. On impulse, I opened a travel website. I typed quiet, peaceful destinations into the search bar. The screen filled with images of serene beaches, misty mountains, and tranquil lakes. A new plan began to form in my mind. They wanted a wedding without me. Fine, I would give myself a vacation without them. The decision to book a vacation was one of the most liberating choices I had ever made. Instead of dwelling on the sting of rejection, I channeled my energy into planning the perfect escape. Jessica's wedding was scheduled for the first Saturday in June. I booked a flight for the Thursday before and a return for the Tuesday after, giving myself 5 blissful days of solitude. I chose a small, secluded resort on the coast of Portugal I'd once seen in a travel magazine, a place with quiet beaches, excellent food, and most importantly, spotty cell service. It was the antithesis of the chaotic, high-stakes drama unfolding back home. The money I'd earmarked for the wedding, what would have been my contribution to their Bali honeymoon fund or that ridiculous espresso machine, effortlessly covered the entire trip. It felt like a fair trade. In the weeks leading up to my departure, I put my family on an information diet. I muted the family group chat and stopped following Jessica's frenetic wedding updates on social media. Leo would occasionally send me a text with an exasperated eye-roll emoji, accompanied by a screenshot of Jess complaining that her custom monogrammed cocktail napkins were the wrong shade of ivory, but I refused to get drawn in. It was all just noise from a world I was no longer a part of. My world was now focused on packing lists, learning a few basic Portuguese phrases, and anticipating the feeling of warm sand between my toes. When the day finally came to leave for my trip, I felt a profound sense of peace. As I sat at the airport, waiting for my flight to board, I sent a picture of my passport and boarding pass to Leo. His reply was instantaneous. "Have the most amazing time. You deserve it. I'll be thinking of you while I'm forced to do the cha-cha slide." I laughed, sent him a heart emoji, and then put my phone on airplane mode. For the next 5 days, I was gloriously disconnected. I woke up to the sound of waves, not notifications. I read books on a sun lounger, explored cobblestone streets in a nearby fishing village, and ate fresh seafood at tiny, family-run restaurants. I went hiking along the cliffs and watched the sunset over the Atlantic. I didn't check my email. I didn't scroll through social media. My phone remained in the hotel safe, a sealed box of potential stress that I had no interest in opening. On Saturday, the day of the wedding, I went for a long swim in the ocean and thought about them for only a fleeting moment. I genuinely hoped, for Mark's sake and for the sake of the innocent guests, that the day went smoothly. Then I put it out of my mind and ordered a glass of wine. The feeling of tranquility stayed with me all the way home. I felt centered, rested, and emotionally uncluttered. The drama with my family felt small and distant, a storm in a teacup that I had watched from a safe harbor. It wasn't until I was in the taxi on the way back to my apartment from the airport that I finally decided to reconnect to the world. I took my phone out of my bag, turned it on, and watched it come to life. It was an immediate, overwhelming assault. The screen lit up with a relentless barrage of notifications. 27 missed calls, 42 text messages, 19 voicemails. My heart started to pound, my calm demeanor instantly evaporating. My first thought was that something terrible had happened to a family member, a real tragedy. I scrolled through the missed calls. There were multiple from Leo, my mom, and several other aunts and uncles. But the most surprising were the ones from Aunt Carol, Jessica, and even Mark. They had each called me multiple times, starting on Saturday evening and continuing through Sunday and Monday. My hands were shaking slightly as I opened my text messages. The screen was a chaotic waterfall of panicked messages. From Leo, Ava, call me the second you get this. Another from Leo an hour later. Okay, you're not going to believe what happened at the wedding. It was a complete and utter disaster. And another, where are you? Are you okay? Call me. Then came the messages from others. From my mom, Ava, honey, call me. Your Aunt Carol is trying to reach you. There was some trouble at the wedding. From a different aunt, hearing some crazy stories about Jessica's wedding. Hope you're doing okay. But it was the texts from the core wedding party that were the most surreal. From Mark, Saturday, 11 p.m. Ava, I know we haven't talked much, but we could really use your help. Please call me. From Jessica, Sunday, 9 a.m. Ava, where are you? I've been calling. I need to talk to you. It's an emergency. From Aunt Carol, Sunday, 2 p.m. Evangeline, I know you are ignoring my calls. This is not the time for your childish games. This is a family crisis, and you need to step up and call me back immediately. My head was spinning. A disaster? A family crisis? What on earth could have happened that would lead them, the very people who had explicitly told me I was not welcome, to be desperately trying to contact me? The taxi pulled up to my building. I paid the driver in a daze, my mind racing through 100 different scenarios, none of which made any sense. I got into my apartment, dropped my bags by the door, and sank onto my couch, Apollo immediately jumping into my lap as if he could sense my turmoil. My peaceful vacation bubble had been violently burst. The chaos I had so blissfully escaped had not only happened, but it seemed to have mutated into something so monstrous that it was now reaching out, trying to pull me back in. With a deep sense of foreboding, I looked at the long list of messages again. The last one from Leo was the most recent, sent just a couple of hours ago. It simply said, "Okay, I'm officially worried now. Please just let me know you're safe. And get ready for the story of a lifetime." I took a deep breath, my finger hovering over Leo's name. It was time to find out what had happened. It was time to learn how a wedding I was banned from for being trouble had managed to implode so spectacularly all on its own. I hit the call button. Leo picked up on the first ring, his voice a mixture of relief and frantic energy. "Ava, oh my God, you're alive. Where have you been? I was starting to think you'd been abducted by aliens." "Worse," I said, managing a weak laugh. "I was on a beach with no cell reception. I just got back and saw everything. What happened, Leo? My phone looks like a disaster zone." "That's because the wedding was a disaster zone," he said, and then he took a deep breath, like a storyteller preparing to launch into an epic tale. "Okay, strap in, because this is a wild ride. Where do I even begin?" He started with the venue. Apparently, Aunt Carol, in an attempt to save money, hadn't paid the full security deposit on time for the main hall at the trendy barn. She had argued with the owner, trying to haggle down the price, and had sent a smaller, partial payment, assuming her charm would smooth things over. It didn't. When the wedding party arrived on Saturday, they discovered the owner had invoked a clause in the contract about late payments and had booked another, more lucrative event in the main hall. They were unceremoniously shuffled into a much smaller, uglier overflow room in the back, right next to the kitchens. "It was awful, Ava," Leo said. "It was this windowless room with fluorescent lighting and stained carpets. Jess had a complete meltdown right there in the parking lot. She was screaming that her aesthetic was ruined." Next up was the catering. In another cost-cutting measure, Jess and Carol had decided against using one of the venue's approved caterers, which would have been expensive but reliable. Instead, they'd hired a guy Jess found on Instagram who promised a gourmet 5-course meal for a fraction of the price. He operated out of a food truck and had a great social media feed, but as it turned out, zero experience catering an event for 150 people. "He showed up an hour and a half late," Leo continued, his voice filled with disbelief. "And he didn't bring what they ordered. He said there was a supplier issue with the salmon and filet mignon, so he'd improvised." The improvisation was lukewarm pulled pork and some kind of soggy pasta salad, and there wasn't nearly enough of it. It was like a sad potluck. Half the guests didn't get any food. At this point, Mark's parents, who were footing a portion of the bill and were already horrified by the bait-and switch with the venue, apparently started making very loud, very pointed comments about the disorganization. Mark's mother was overheard telling her sister that this was the most shambolic event she'd ever attended. This, of course, got back to Aunt Carol, who then confronted Mark's mother by the sad, wilting dessert table. A heated argument erupted, with Carol accusing them of being ungrateful and Mark's mother accusing Carol of being cheap and incompetent. But the real catastrophe, the moment the entire event truly imploded, revolved around the photographer. Jess had found a young, up-and-coming photographer and had negotiated a steep discount in exchange for massive exposure on her social media channels. The photographer had reluctantly agreed, but on the condition that the remaining balance of his fee was paid in full before he handed over any photos. So, after the ceremony and the disastrous dinner service, Leo explained, the photographer finds Jess and Carol and politely asks for the final payment so he can start editing the photos. And Ava, they didn't have it. They told him the guests' gift money would cover it, but they hadn't even opened the cards yet. They asked him to just trust them. The photographer, who had likely been burned by exposure promises before, flatly refused. He told them, no payment, no pictures. Jess started crying, then screaming. She accused him of trying to ruin her day. Aunt Carol jumped in and threatened to ruin his reputation online. The photographer, a NTY-something kid who was completely overwhelmed, finally just snapped. He said, "You know what? Fine, keep your money, and I'll keep my photos." And then he packed up his gear and walked out. "He left, Ava, he just left," Leo said, his voice a whisper of awe. "He took all the pictures with him. The getting ready, the ceremony, all of it. There is no professional photographic evidence that this wedding ever happened." The departure of the photographer was the final nail in the coffin. It sent Jessica into a spiral so dramatic that she locked herself in the bathroom, wailing. The guests, most of whom were still hungry and had just witnessed 3 separate public confrontations, started to leave in droves. By 9:30 p.m., the wedding was effectively over. The DJ was packing up, the food truck caterer was arguing with Mark over his bill, and the venue owner was demanding payment for damages to the ugly backroom. So now, Leo concluded, his voice heavy with exhaustion, they're left with a mountain of debt. All the deposits are gone. The vendors who actually did show up, like the DJ and the florist, are demanding their final payments. The caterer is threatening to take them to small claims court, and they have no wedding photos to show for any of it. They spent all this money, and probably more they didn't have, to create this perfect image, and the entire thing disintegrated into a nightmare. I was silent, trying to process the sheer scale of the incompetence. It was a perfect storm of ego, entitlement, and terrible financial planning. Every single disaster could have been avoided with a little humility and common sense. "So that's why they were calling me," I finally said, the puzzle pieces clicking into place. "Yeah," Leo confirmed. "They're in a massive hole. They've burned through their savings. Mark's parents are refusing to give them another dime after the way Carol treated them, and they're panicking. And in their panic, they remembered their favorite family member, the boring financial analyst with the stable job and the healthy savings account." A bitter laugh escaped my lips. "The troublemaker," I said. "The one and only," Leo replied. "So, get ready, because if I know Aunt Carol, the real storm is just about to hit you." After I hung up with Leo, I sat in the quiet of my apartment for a long time, letting the story of the wedding disaster settle over me. My first instinct wasn't glee or a triumphant sense of "I told you so." It was a profound, bone-deep weariness. This was the exact brand of chaos I had spent my entire adult life trying to avoid. The arguments, the financial irresponsibility, the prioritization of image over substance. It was the family pattern, and I had simply been lucky enough to be outside its blast radius this time. But now, they were trying to pull me into the rubble to help them rebuild. My phone, which I'd placed on the coffee table, felt like a ticking bomb. I knew it was only a matter of time before it rang again. They had tried to reach me all weekend. My return home would surely trigger a new wave of attempts. As a financial analyst, my mind immediately started breaking down the situation into logical components. Problem: Aunt Carol and Jessica created a financial crisis through poor planning and arrogance. Complication: they lack the resources or the humility to solve it themselves. Proposed solution: theirs. Tap into Ava's resources. My role: to provide a financial bailout for an event I was explicitly banned from. Analyzed this way, the absurdity was almost comical. They had ostracized me, labeling me a troublemaker to preserve the perfect, positive energy of the event. They had made a calculated decision that my presence was a liability. Yet now, in the aftermath of their self-inflicted catastrophe, they saw my financial stability not just as an asset, but as an obligation. They had drawn a clear line in the sand, separating me from the family unit for the celebration. They couldn't now attempt to erase that line for the cleanup. My plan, as it formed in my mind, wasn't one of revenge. Revenge felt too messy, too emotional. It would require an investment of energy that they simply didn't deserve. My plan was simpler and, I thought, far more powerful. It was a plan of inaction, a plan to hold the line. I would protect my peace and my finances with the same quiet, unyielding resolve I had used when I accepted my disinvitation. My plan was to treat their request not as a family matter, but as a business proposition. And from a business perspective, it was the worst investment I could possibly imagine. I thought back on all the smaller instances over the years. The time Aunt Carol forgot her wallet and I had to cover a $100 lunch. The time Jess had her car towed and called me in a panic, needing money for the impound fee, which she never paid back. Each time, I had helped, telling myself it was easier than dealing with the ensuing drama of saying no, but my help had never been appreciated. It had been expected. It had enabled their behavior, teaching them that there was always a safety net, always a quiet, responsible cousin who would sigh and open her checkbook. Not this time. This wasn't a $100 lunch. This was thousands of dollars of debt born from their own hubris. Bailing them out now would be the ultimate act of enabling. It would send the message that their actions have no consequences. I walked into my home office and sat at my desk. I pulled out a notepad and drew a line down the middle. On one side, I wrote pros of helping. I stared at the blank column for a full minute. The only thing I could think of was a temporary cessation of their panicked phone calls and perhaps a short-lived, insincere gratitude that would vanish the moment the next crisis arose. On the other side, I wrote cons of helping. The list flowed effortlessly. Financial loss with zero chance of repayment. Reinforcing their belief that I am their personal ATM. Condoning their horrible treatment of me. Sacrificing my own financial goals, a down payment on a home, for their irresponsibility. Becoming entangled in their ongoing drama with vendors and in-laws. Losing my self-respect. The list went on. Seeing it all in black and white solidified my resolve. My peace of mind had a price, and that price was a firm, unwavering no. I started to rehearse the conversations in my head. They would come at me with different tactics. Mark, the new husband, would likely be apologetic and embarrassed, appealing to my sense of pity. Jessica would be hysterical and dramatic, trying to make me feel like her entire future happiness rested on my decision. And Aunt Carol, she would be the most difficult. She would wield guilt like a weapon, invoking the concept of family as if it were a binding contract that only applied when she needed something. She would get angry, she would insult me, and she would try to manipulate me into feeling selfish and cruel. I had to be ready. I would be calm. I would be rational. I would not raise my voice. I would not engage with the emotional bait. I would state my position clearly and concisely, like a professional delivering a final verdict. I would remind them of their own words, their own decision to exclude me. It wasn't about punishment. It was about boundaries. It was about honoring the reality they themselves had created. You cannot cast someone out of the family circle, and then, a day later, demand they fulfill the duties of its most loyal member. As I sat there, the plan cementing in my mind, a sense of calm washed over me, replacing the anxiety I'd felt since I turned on my phone. I had survived the disinvitation with my dignity intact. I would survive this, too. This was more than just about money. It was about defining the terms of my own life and my relationships. I would not be the family's emergency fund. I would not be the solution to their self-made problems. I was Ava, the troublemaker. And the trouble I was about to cause was the simple, devastating act of letting them lie in the bed they had so extravagantly made. My phone started to ring. An unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. The first wave was beginning. The siege began in earnest the next morning. It started subtly. A call from a distant aunt who I rarely spoke to. She made small talk for 5 minutes before casually mentioning the unfortunate situation with Jessica's wedding. "Your Aunt Carol is just beside herself," she said with a sigh. "It's such a mess. I know you've always been so good with money, Ava. They could really use some sound advice right now." My advice would be to create a budget, cut all non-essential spending, and explore options for a personal loan, I said in a calm, professional tone. There are several reputable credit unions they could look into. There was a stunned silence on the other end. "Oh," she said, "well, I was thinking more, you know." "No, I don't know," I replied, my voice still polite but firm. "Financial advice is what I can offer." The conversation ended quickly after that. That was the probe, the reconnaissance mission. When it failed, they sent in the next wave. An hour later, Mark called. He sounded exhausted and deeply embarrassed. "Ava, hi, it's Mark," he started, his voice low. "Listen, I am so sorry to be calling you about this. And I'm sorry about the whole invitation thing. That was Carol and Jess. I should have stepped in." It was a weak apology, but it was more than I had received from anyone else. Still, I wasn't going to let it sway me. "What can I do for you, Mark?" I asked. He stumbled through a mortifying recap of the debt. The caterer was threatening to sue for his full fee. The venue was holding them liable for damages because a guest, in his frustration, had punched a hole in the drywall of the ugly back room. The total was well into the 5-figure range. We're drowning," he said, his voice cracking. "We don't know what to do. Jess is a wreck. Carol is making everything worse by yelling at everyone. I just thought, maybe you could help us with a loan. We would pay you back, I swear, every penny." Here it was, the direct ask. I took a steadying breath. "Mark, I appreciate you calling me directly, but I'm going to have to say no." "Oh," he said, the air going out of him. "Can I ask why?" "You can," I said, my voice softening slightly but losing none of its firmness. "You and Jessica and Carol made it very clear that you did not want me to be a part of your wedding day. You felt my presence would bring drama and negative energy. I was not considered family enough to share in your celebration. Therefore, I don't see why I should be considered family enough to share in your debt. The two are connected. You can't have one without the other." He was silent for a long moment. I could hear his shallow breathing on the other end. I guess I understand," he finally whispered. "I'm sorry." He sounded truly defeated, not just because I'd said no, but because he knew I was right. The final bosses, as Leo would call them, waited until the evening. The first call was from Jessica. I let it go to voicemail. The message she left was a minute-long ramble of sobs and hysterical accusations. "I can't believe you're doing this to me. My wedding was ruined, my life is ruined, and you won't even help. I'm your cousin. You're supposed to care." 10 minutes later, the main event. "Aunt Carol, I decided to take this call. It was time to end this once and for all." "Evangeline," she snapped, dispensing with any pleasantries. "Jessica is hysterical. Mark just told me what you said to him. How could you be so cruel?" "I don't think it's cruel to maintain a boundary, Aunt Carol," I replied calmly, picturing the spreadsheet in my mind, the list of pros and cons. "A boundary? This is family. We are in a crisis. Family helps family no matter what. It's what we do." she exclaimed, her voice thick with self-righteous indignation. "Is that why you disinvited me from the wedding? As an act of family help?" I asked, my voice laced with ice. She sputtered, caught off guard. "That was different. That was to protect Jessica's feelings. This is a real problem. You have a good job, you have money saved up. I know you do. It's selfish to just sit on it when your family is suffering." "My finances are my own, and I've worked very hard to be in a stable position," I stated. "The suffering you're talking about is a direct consequence of your and Jessica's poor decisions. You gambled on getting discounts, you hired unreliable people, and you spent money you didn't have to project an image. Your gamble failed. This is not my crisis to solve." Her voice turned venomous. "You always thought you were better than us, didn't you? Sitting there in your quiet little apartment, judging all of us. This is your fault, you know. If you had been there, maybe you could have talked some sense into the vendors. Maybe none of this would have happened." The sheer, breathtaking absurdity of that statement almost made me laugh. I was banned for being trouble, but now the trouble happened because I wasn't there to prevent it. "Aunt Carol," I said, my voice dropping to a low, chillingly calm register. "Listen to me very carefully. You made a choice. You chose to exclude me. You told me in no uncertain terms that my presence was not wanted. A person cannot be both a liability and a savior. You have to pick one. You picked. Now you have to live with it. Do not call me about this again." I didn't wait for a reply. I hung up the phone and immediately blocked her number. Then I blocked Jessica's number. A wave of adrenaline and relief washed over me. I had faced the storm and held my ground. The confrontation was over. The boundary was set. It was a painful, ugly series of conversations, but they were necessary. The $1,000 phone calls had ended with my savings account untouched and my self-respect fully intact. In the weeks that followed, the fallout from my decision rippled through the family. As I had predicted, Aunt Carol and Jessica launched a smear campaign against me. The narrative they spun was that I was a cold, heartless miser who had abandoned them in their darkest hour. They conveniently omitted the part about my disinvitation from the wedding, of course. To hear them tell it, their perfect day had been tragically ruined by incompetent vendors, and when they turned to their wealthy cousin for a little help, she had cruelly turned her back on them. Some family members bought their story. A few of my mother's cousins sent me passive-aggressive texts about the importance of forgiveness and family loyalty. I ignored them. They were part of Carol's orbit, and their opinions meant nothing to me. What surprised me, however, was the support I received from unexpected corners. Mark's pa, Rents, who had been on the receiving end of Carol's wrath at the wedding, reached out to me. His mother called me one afternoon, her voice apologetic. "Ava," she said, "I just wanted to say that we heard what happened, and we want you to know that we think you did the absolute right thing. What Carol and Jessica did to you, and how they expected you to then clean up their mess, was appalling. We're so sorry our son got caught up in all of it." It was a small gesture, but it meant the world to me. It was validation from an outside source that I wasn't the monster they were painting me to be. Leo, of course, remained my staunchest ally. He kept me updated on the ongoing saga. Jessica and Mark were forced to take out a high-interest personal loan to pay off the most aggressive vendors. The dream honeymoon to Bali was canceled, replaced by a weekend trip to a budget hotel 2 hours away. They had to sell the new car they'd bought just before the wedding and downgrade to a much smaller apartment because they could no longer afford their rent. Jessica's glamorous social media presence evaporated overnight. There were no honeymoon pictures, no gushing posts about her perfect day. There was only a deafening silence. The beautiful image she had worked so hard to curate had been shattered, and there was nothing left to post. My relationship with my aunt and cousin was severed completely and irrevocably. I no longer attended the big holiday gatherings at Carol's house. The thought of sitting at a table with them, of enduring their glares and whispered comments, was unbearable. Instead, I started new traditions. I spent Thanksgiving with friends and Christmas with Leo and his parents, who had quietly taken my side in the whole affair. My circle became smaller, but it became stronger and more genuine. One evening, about 6 months after the wedding, Leo came over for dinner. He told me that he'd run into Mark at the grocery store. He looked terrible, Leo said, shaking his head. Stressed, tired. He said things are really hard. The debt is a constant source of fighting between him and Jess. She blames him for not having richer parents, and he blames her for her ridiculous expectations. That's sad, I said, and I meant it. I took no joy in their misery. All I had ever wanted was to be left alone, to be treated with a baseline of respect. He also said something else, Leo added, looking me in the eye. He said, "You know, Ava was right. We had no right to ask her for anything." He told me that he and Jess are in marriage counseling, trying to sort through it all. Hearing that felt like a quiet, final victory. It wasn't about the money, and it never had been. It was about the principle. It was about respect. My decision to say no hadn't just protected my finances. It had forced them, in the most painful way possible, to finally confront the consequences of their actions. They couldn't blame me for the disaster, no matter how hard they tried. The trouble they had always feared I would cause was simply the uncomfortable reflection of their own dysfunction. As I look back on it now, I feel a sense of peace. There is a lingering sadness for the family I wish I had, the kind of family that is built on mutual respect and genuine affection, not on appearances and obligation. But that is not the family I was given. The family I have now is one I've curated myself, a smaller, quieter group of people who value me for who I am, not for what I can provide. My life is still orderly, my apartment is still quiet, and my finances are secure. I finally learned that true family doesn't ban you from the party and then send you the bill. True family saves you a seat, and they never, ever make you feel like you are the trouble.